It was supposed to be a standard morning segment. ABC's The View was live, and everything was proceeding as expected, studio lights on full beam, a table of seasoned co-hosts polished and poised, and the familiar blend of banter, buzz, and political commentary humming through the air. Joy Behar, flanked by Sunny Hostin and Alyssa Farah Griffin, sipped coffee while preparing to welcome their next guest. Then the name was read. Please welcome Denzel Washington. The audience applauded, but it wasn't the thunderous ovation Denzel was used to. It felt polite. Measured. Like they weren't sure whether to clap out of excitement or hesitation. Denzel walked onto the stage with quiet confidence, wearing a charcoal gray suit, open collar, no tie. His expression was calm, not smiling, but focused. The man didn't need a script to make an impact. Joy stood to greet him, flashing a wide grin that didn't reach her eyes. Denzel, welcome. We're so thrilled to have you, she said, her voice bright. Denzel shook her hand, nodding. Appreciate the invite, he replied, then took a seat. There was a pause, a subtle moment where something shifted in the room. As if everyone felt that this wasn't going to be a typical fluffy celebrity interview. And they were right. Joy leaned in. Let's dive right in, she said. You've been vocal about your faith and your views on how divided the country's become. But don't you think some of that division comes from people like you refusing to admit when they benefit from the very systems they criticize? The tone was sharp, almost rehearsed. The audience stirred. Denzel looked directly at her. You want to talk about systems, he said slowly. Let's talk about media platforms pretending to be neutral while pushing personal politics as fact. The air thickened. Joy blinked. I'm not here to play victim, he continued, voice steady. I'm here to point out the contradiction of a show that claims to welcome all voices while sneering at anyone who doesn't echo the script. Sunny shifted uncomfortably. Alyssa stayed quiet. You say I benefit from the system. I worked 40 years to build something without selling my soul. If I speak now, it's not from privilege. It's from responsibility. Joy tried to interrupt, but Denzel didn't stop. You ask hard questions when it's safe. But real dialogue? That's what makes people uncomfortable. And I came here to make people uncomfortable. There was a silence so dense it felt physical. Then Denzel leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on Joy. I'm not here for applause. I'm here because someone needs to say it. The hypocrisy on this stage doesn't represent the truth. Cameras rolled. The producers panicked. And the crowd? They were no longer clapping, the studio had gone unnaturally still. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged frantic glances. In the control booth, someone muttered, "Cut to commercial." But the executive producer shook his head. No way. This is gold. Back at the table, Joy Behar struggled to reclaim control. Well, Denzel, she said, forcing a smile, this is a daytime talk show, not a courtroom. Denzel didn't flinch. Funny. Because it feels like I've been put on trial since the second I walked in. That line hit like a brick. Some audience members clapped, not out of loyalty, but recognition. Sunny Hostin cleared her throat, trying to shift the tone. Denzel, no one's putting you on trial. But when you speak about personal responsibility, don't you think it's fair to challenge where that intersects with systemic issues? He raised a hand gently. Respectfully, Sunny, I'm not here to repeat slogans. I'm here to remind people that principles don't change depending on the room. He turned to her fully now. You want to talk systemic issues? Let's talk about how every time someone from outside your echo chamber speaks with clarity, you label it dangerous or problematic. That's not justice. That's branding. The audience gasped. Joy leaned forward, visibly frustrated. So you're saying this show is biased? I'm saying it wears its bias like a badge, Denzel replied calmly. and pretends it's objectivity. Even Alyssa Farah Griffin, often the lone conservative voice on the panel, was speechless. She looked down at her notes, lips tight. Joy tried again, her tone sharp now. "You're coming on here, Denzel, and acting like we don't allow diverse opinions. But we've had everyone from Ted Cruz to Candace Owens on this table. And every time Denzel cut in, they're ambushed, mocked, and edited into villains for ratings." That was it. The air in the room turned electric. Denzel looked around the set. "You don't invite voices like mine to learn. You invite us to lose. But I didn't come here to lose, I came here to tell the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes you." One of the cameramen whispered, "He's not just surviving, he's owning the stage." Backstage, phones were blowing up. Social media clips were already being uploaded. Comments flooding in. "Denzel just dismantled The View live. He's saying what a lot of us have been thinking for years. Finally, someone who won't be bullied into silence." And at the table, Joy Behar, queen of the midday mic, had nothing left to say. "Not yet." "You know what's ironic?" Denzel said, his voice still even, his gaze unwavering. "You preach inclusion, but the second someone walks in who doesn't play your game, you act like they're trespassing." Joy scoffed. "Oh, come on." "No," Denzel replied, not missing a beat. "You come on. You invite people like me here to check a diversity box, not to actually hear us." There was no shouting. No raised voice. But the gravity in Denzel's words silenced the room harder than any outburst could have. Alyssa, clearly shaken, finally spoke. "I'll be honest, I don't always agree with you, but you're not wrong. We say we want different views, but we make it almost impossible to express them." Sonny gave Alyssa a sideways glance, the kind that warned don't go rogue. But Alyssa pressed on. "And maybe the fact that this whole room tensed up the second Denzel challenged us says more about us than it does about him." The audience murmured, surprised. Denzel nodded toward her. "That's courage. You don't have to agree with me. You just have to be honest." Joy, visibly irritated now, tried to rally. "We're not afraid of honesty here. We deal in truth. Truth that's filtered," Denzel replied. "Polished and packaged for applause lines. But I'm not here for applause." He paused. "I'm here because America's gotten used to echo chambers dressed up as conversation. And I think it's time we broke the mirror." The phrase landed with a thud, raw, poetic, and sharp. Joy tried to interrupt again, but something in the audience shifted. They weren't clapping or booing. They were just listening. In the control room, the director leaned back in his chair. "This isn't just a moment. This is a reckoning." Meanwhile, on Twitter, clips were already trending. Hashtag Denzel on the View. Hashtag Speak the Truth. Hashtag Echo Chambers Exposed. Back on set, Joy went for one last jab. "Well, Denzel, if you think this platform is so biased, why'd you even agree to come on?" And with the calmness of a man who'd already won the room, Denzel replied. "Because sometimes the only way to challenge a stage is to stand on it." The audience erupted. Not a wild standing ovation, but something more powerful, respect. Joy Behar leaned back, arms crossed, out of comebacks. For a moment, Joy didn't speak. She blinked, forced a smile, then glanced toward the camera as if to signal she was still in control. But everyone in the room knew, the reins had slipped from her hands. Denzel sat calmly, shoulders relaxed, yet unshakably focused. Not angry. Just grounded. And that's what made it so devastating. Sonny tried to pivot. "Denzel, let me ask, what exactly do you want from these conversations?" "Clarity," he replied instantly. "And a willingness to let uncomfortable truths breathe for longer than 30 seconds. He turned slightly toward her. You ask questions, but you don't want answers. You want sound bites you can label. If I say something you agree with, I'm enlightened. If I challenge you, I'm dangerous. A few claps. Not many. But they were real. Joy leaned forward again, this time with steel in her tone. Are you accusing this show of censorship? Denzel met her eyes. I'm accusing this show of moral performance. Of pretending it's brave to nod along with the same 10 opinions, and call that courage. Then, slowly, he pushed his chair back. The screech of the legs across the floor cut through the silence like a knife. Everyone froze. I didn't come here to be celebrated, he said. And I won't stay here to be silenced. He stood. Joy opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Denzel raised a hand. No need, he said softly. You've already said enough. And with that, he turned and walked off the set. No camera cut. No producers rushing in. Just silence, and the sound of footsteps growing distant. The control room didn't cut to commercial. They didn't dare. At home, viewers were stunned. The hashtag #DenzelWalks hit 1.2 million impressions within 10 minutes. Cable news scrambled to cut in. Twitter threads exploded. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He just walked out like he'd already won. That's not an exit. That's a statement. The View just got a mirror held up to it, and it cracked. Backstage, a young intern whispered to a senior producer, "Was that planned?" The producer didn't answer. He was still staring at the monitor. Because on screen, Denzel wasn't just a guest anymore. He was a movement. Backstage, the air was electric. Producers rushed to headsets, trying to salvage the segment. Joy Behar was handed a card with new talking points, but she waved it off. "We're not brushing this under the rug," she muttered. "He doesn't get the last word." But it was too late. In the green room, Denzel was already putting on his coat. A production assistant timidly approached him. "Mr. Washington, the studio would like to offer a post-segment follow-up, maybe a one-on-one with Sonny Orr." Denzel shook his head. "I said what I came to say." They weren't listening. They were waiting to reply. Outside, reporters were already gathering near the studio exit. TMZ, HuffPost, even conservative outlets. Everyone wanted a quote. A soundbite. A headline. But Denzel said nothing. He slid into a black SUV, rolled down the window halfway, and gave only one line to the press. "America doesn't need louder voices. It needs braver listeners." That quote went viral within minutes. At Fox News, the clip of the walkout played on a loop, but with admiration. "He stood his ground," one host commented. "Didn't flinch, didn't fold." At MSNBC, there was hesitancy. He made a point, but did he really need to embarrass them like that? Meanwhile, on social media, the divide only sharpened. This wasn't a conversation. This was a conviction. Denzel just exposed what we've all known: The View isn't about views. You don't have to agree with him to respect him. And that's rare. Back on set, the co-hosts tried to regroup. Joy forced a smile. "Well, folks, that was unexpected. We appreciate all perspectives on this show, even when they walk out dramatically." The audience gave a lukewarm laugh. But Whoopi Goldberg, who had remained unusually quiet during the exchange, leaned forward and said, "I've sat at this table a long time. And I've disagreed with a lot of people. But one thing I'll never do is pretend their story doesn't matter just because it makes me uncomfortable." She turned to Joy. He didn't walk out to make a scene. He walked out because the scene was already broken. Even the camera operator tilted slightly, catching Joy's tight expression. There it was again, the mirror. And this time, The View had no script to hide behind. Later that evening, Denzel sat quietly in a modest jazz bar tucked away in Harlem, the kind of place where cameras didn't follow, and nobody asked for autographs. He sipped his drink, listening to a slow Coltrane track rolling over dim-lit tables. But even here, the buzz had followed him. A woman at the next table leaned in gently. "I saw what you did today," she said. "That wasn't just television. That was history." Denzel offered a humble nod. "It wasn't meant to be a moment," he replied. "Just honesty." Meanwhile, the media circus had gone full tilt. CNN aired a full panel titled, "When Actors Speak Truth, Was Denzel Right to Walk Out?" Everyone from political strategists to pop culture critics weighed in. At The View headquarters, ABC executives gathered in a tense roundtable. A rating spike had hit, but not for the reasons they wanted. The demographic breakdown showed younger viewers praising Denzel's stance, calling it the most honest 3 minutes on live TV this year. One producer nervously flipped through index cards. He didn't yell, didn't insult, didn't grandstand. He just held up a mirror. An executive frowned. And our hosts flinched. Across town, Joy Behar was drafting a Twitter thread. "Everyone is entitled to their opinion, but I stand by the values of this show." But even the replies to her post cut deep. "Then maybe let people finish their sentences. You invite people to talk, not to trap them. Denzel didn't attack you. He revealed you." In the days following, clips of the exchange spread beyond politics. Comedy shows, reaction videos, even classrooms used the moment to discuss media bias and listening culture. One viral video titled, "The 60-Second Masterclass in Calm Power," racked up 12 million views in under a week. Meanwhile, Denzel received a call from Ava DuVernay. "You shook the room without raising your voice," she said. "You know what that makes you?" He chuckled softly. "What?" "A threat." Denzel paused. "Then maybe it's time people get threatened by truth again." That night, as the city wind whispered through subway grates and headlines danced across glowing screens, one man's walkout became something more, a stand. A reminder. That silence, when chosen with conviction, speaks louder than scripted outrage. By the weekend, The View's studio had become ground zero for debate. Protesters and supporters alike gathered outside ABC's gates, signs in hand, chants in the air. One read. "Dignity walks out. Ego stays seated." Inside, Joy Behar was visibly agitated. The fallout had shifted the public's lens, and not in her favor. "I've been doing this show for over 20 years, she barked in the morning meeting. "And I won't be defined by one guest who couldn't handle disagreement." But Sarah Haynes, usually the diplomatic one, raised an eyebrow. "He wasn't disagreeing, Joy. He was correcting a misrepresentation. You cut him off before he even reached his point." The silence was more damning than shouting. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Denzel met with a group of high school students for a scheduled outreach program, an event that had nothing to do with the show, but had now gained national attention. A 17-year-old girl raised her hand. "Mr. Washington, how did you stay so calm when everyone was trying to twist your words?" Denzel didn't flinch. "Because I wasn't there to win," he said. "I was there to remind them, and anyone watching, that conviction doesn't need volume. And truth doesn't need applause." That answer was clipped into a TikTok and went viral in 3 hours. On YouTube, a conservative commentator shocked his own followers when he praised Denzel's approach. "I may not agree with all of his politics, but I respect a man who says his piece and doesn't grovel for likes." Meanwhile, back at The View, producers scrambled to prepare for Monday's episode. Ratings had climbed, but not for the reasons they wanted. Audiences weren't tuning in to hear political takes. They were coming back for accountability. Whoopi entered the dressing room without knocking. "Joy," she said flatly, "you need to decide if this show is about proving you're right, or proving you can still listen? Joy looked up. Her expression for once wasn't defensive, it was tired. I didn't expect him to walk out, she admitted. Whoopi sat down across from her. Maybe that's the problem. You didn't expect him to stand tall either. Across the city, Denzel watched reruns with his mother. She was quiet for a long moment, then finally spoke. You didn't raise your voice, she said. He smiled. Didn't need to. She nodded. Then they heard you. Even the ones who didn't clap. The following Monday, The View opened with a new intro, shorter, tighter, attempting to steer attention back to safer waters. But the audience wasn't there for comfort. They were there for fallout. Joy Behar took her seat like usual, but something was different. The applause was lighter. The room felt colder. I want to address the elephant in the room, she began, hands folded. Last week, we had Mr. Denzel Washington here as a guest. Things got heated, and I may have cut him off too quickly. For that, I acknowledge it. She didn't say, apologize. She didn't say, regret. She said, acknowledge. And the difference didn't go unnoticed. Clips of her non-apology spread almost as fast as Denzel's speech had. Social media lit up with reactions. That's not accountability. That's damage control. You got humbled and still missed the point. Denzel spoke truth. You responded with ego. Meanwhile, Denzel was back in New York, walking into a public library for a scheduled reading with veterans. As he read a passage from Maya Angelou, a Vietnam vet in the second row wiped his eyes. You said something I never heard on that show, the man told him afterward. That it's not weakness to listen. That it's power. Elsewhere, campaign managers from both sides were taking notes. Denzel's appearance had become a cultural Rorschach test, and neither party knew how to spin it. A leaked memo from a Senate re-election team read. Denzel moment triggered across demographic resonance. Do not attack. Do not claim. Let it breathe. Meanwhile, The View's PR team drafted new guest guidelines. A line was added. Avoid personal attacks or confrontational framing unless cleared by senior producer. Backstage, one junior producer muttered, so now we only allow fake arguments? Another replied, no, we just want to avoid real consequences. Denzel, however, wasn't watching any of this unfold. He was having lunch with his son, cell phone face down, enjoying the quiet. You didn't check the news today? His son asked. Denzel smiled. If it's real, it'll still matter tomorrow. If it's noise, it'll die before dessert. And that, perhaps, was what set him apart. Where others chased moments, he created them, not through performance, but through presence. And America, for one rare week, remembered what that looked like. 2 days later, a special edition of Nightline aired a segment titled, When Silence Speaks Louder, the Denzel Moment. It wasn't tabloid fluff. It was a full, 12-minute analysis, complete with timeline, playback, expert commentary on public discourse, and media ethics. A behavioral psychologist on the panel said, Denzel's pause, posture, and refusal to escalate was the most powerful thing he could have done. That's not passive. That's practiced restraint. That's control. Even conservative outlets, usually quick to dismiss celebrity activism, struggled to frame it as radical. One headline read, Disagreement without disrespect? It's been a while. Meanwhile, Joy Behar took a leave of absence. Officially, for health and rest. Unofficially, to let the dust settle. Ana Navarro filled in as guest host. The energy was different. More curious, less combative. Viewers noticed. Ratings held steady. But the comment sections were flooded with one name. Bring back Denzel. Let him host for a day. He didn't just speak, he shifted something. That shift was rippling outward. In a university ethics class at Howard, a professor played the original segment and asked students to write reaction essays. Over 80% centered on one theme. He left without shouting, and took the power with him. On Capitol Hill, a progressive senator quoted Denzel in a speech about media responsibility. Even SNL took a swing. A sketch showed an exaggerated, The View episode where each host screamed over the next, and a dead-serious Denzel impersonator sat silently, sipping tea, unmoved. It brought the house down. Denzel, when told about it later, only chuckled. I guess I've become a meme. But memes fade. Movements don't. And somewhere, the movement had already started. Young people were resharing the clip not for politics, but for presence. For grace under fire. For what it looked like when a man refused to be small, even when every voice around him tried to shrink him. A week later, Denzel was invited to deliver a keynote at the National Media Ethics Forum in Washington, D.C. The audience was a patchwork of journalists, students, politicians, and media executives. Everyone expected the typical polished Hollywood speech. What they got was something else entirely. He stepped up to the podium. No teleprompter. Just a folded paper in his pocket and a glass of water. When I walked into that studio last week, he began, I didn't plan on walking out with headlines. A pause. I planned on walking in with my humanity. And walking out with it intact. The room stilled. I've spent decades in front of cameras. I've seen the power of a well-timed edit. The cutaway shot. The manipulated moment. But what happened that day wasn't edited. It was raw. It was real. And that's why it mattered. He scanned the room slowly. We've lost something. Not just in media, but in how we treat disagreement. We've started acting like volume equals truth. Like being the loudest person in the room makes you the wisest. Then he leaned in, tone sharper. But here's the thing. Integrity doesn't yell. Wisdom doesn't interrupt. And courage, sometimes courage just sits still and lets people reveal themselves. Murmurs. Phones down. No one wanted to miss a word. Denzel continued, I don't hate The View. I don't hate joy. But I do hate the game we're all being fed, that conflict is the only currency, that cutting someone off is a win, that listening is weakness. A beat. So I walked out. Not for drama. But because staying would have meant shrinking. And I don't shrink for applause. He stepped back. No mic drop. No grand gesture. Just a nod. And then he exited stage left, the same way he walked off that set, steady, quiet, unbothered. The next morning, one newspaper headline read. Denzel didn't just walk out, he walked us into something better. What if walking away was the strongest move of all? Denzel didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. In a world where shouting gets the clicks, he reminded us that truth doesn't need a microphone, it just needs presence. If this story struck a chord with you, drop a comment, share it, and hit that subscribe button. Because at Power Stories, we don't just follow the noise, we follow the moments that matter. See you in the next one.